Welcome back, everyone. We are officially on to part 3 of our 4-part Balance and Gait Rehabilitation Explainer series, and I'm absolutely thrilled to walk you through this one today. As clinicians, we all know that helping our vestibular patients regain their independence isn't just about handing them a generic sheet of exercises, right? It's about targeted, evidence-based, progressive prescription. So today, we're focusing on exactly how to build that progression to drive actual, measurable neuroplasticity. This episode is based on the literature review, Balance and Gait Rehabilitation, Evidence-Based Practice, Sensory Integration Assessment and Progressive Exercise, published by Australian Dizziness Clinics, available at australiandizzinessclinics.com. Let's kick things off with a clinical scenario we've literally all seen. You've got two patients. Both present with really similar vestibular profiles, and both receive identical generic balance worksheets at their very first appointment. Fast forward 6 weeks later, patient A is back to their daily routine, happily walking the dog around the neighborhood with total confidence. But patient B, well, they've completely plateaued and are still struggling with basic community ambulation. So why does this happen? The answer is actually pretty simple. The difference is the progression rule, not the worksheet. Generic balance lists absolutely do not drive neuroplasticity. To force the brain to adapt, we need a progressive sensory challenge. It's the deliberate manipulation of sensory weighting, the introduction of dual tasking, and varying the terrain that actually yields a real functional result by week 6. Okay, let's dive into this clinical algorithm. This framework beautifully maps out our entire strategy. We don't just throw the whole shebang at the patient all at once. Instead, we trace distinct branches. We start with static balance, where we carefully manipulate stance, surface, and vision. Then, once we've built that solid foundation, we branch out into reactive training with perturbations. And finally, we translate all those stationary gains into dynamic gait. Which brings us to Section 1, Static Balance Progression. This phase systematically forces the vestibular system to step up by deliberately removing the patient's sensory compensations. Think of it like a grid. Across the top, we vary the stance, starting with feet apart, moving to feet together, semi-tandem, full tandem, and finally the single-leg stance. Then, going down, we manipulate surface and visual input. We move from a firm surface with eyes open to eyes closed. Then we bring in a compliant foam surface, and finally, the ultimate challenge, a foam surface with eyes closed. With every single step, we're removing a crutch, forcing that vestibular system to work overtime. But how do we actually dose this? Well, the clinical dosing is incredibly specific. For these static positions, we want the patient holding the stance for 30 seconds, doing 3 to 5 reps daily. But here is the absolute golden rule for progression. You only advance the patient to the next, harder stage across 3 consecutive sessions when they are 90% stable. That means minimal arm waving and 0 loss of balance. If you jump ahead too fast, you risk falls, which completely shatters patient confidence and literally sets your rehab back weeks. All right, moving right along to Section 2, Reactive Perturbation Training. Because let's face it, the real world doesn't stand perfectly still while you practice balancing on one leg. Static holding alone is entirely insufficient for real-world stumble recovery. To actually present falls out in the wild, patients need reactive training. We introduce stimuli like multidirectional shoulder bumps to forced reactive stepping strategies, or even sudden surface translations if you're lucky enough to have dynamic posterography platforms in your clinic. Why do we push them like this? Because clinician-applied external forces bypass those slower cortical balance mechanisms and directly activate the rapid brainstem vestibulospinal reflexes. We are literally training the body's automatic instantaneous safety net. Next up is Section 3, Dynamic Gait and Terrain. Now, what's really interesting about this progression is how we take those clinic gains and make them truly functional. This is where the rubber meets the road. We start in the total safety of the clinic on smooth surfaces. Then we progress to carpet, foam, and balance pads. But we absolutely can't stop there. We have to take them outside to pavement, then uneven grass, and finally unpredictable gravel. Each one of these steps increasingly degrades the reliability of their proprioceptive feedback, meaning their recovering vestibular system has to work incredibly hard just to keep them upright. And as if walking on gravel wasn't hard enough, right? We then layer the challenge. We add dynamic head turns, looking left, right, up, and down while walking. Then, we introduce cognitive dual tasks, like having them count backwards from 100 by 7s while walking. This exposes what we call cognitive motor interference. You see, in a healthy system, balance is fully automatic. But in a compromised vestibular system, the brain uses precious cognitive bandwidth just to stay upright. By dual tasking, we expose that hidden deficit and actively rehabilitate it. All of this clinic-based training absolutely must connect back to real-world complexity. So, we progress the patient to community walking in super busy visual environments. Think navigating a crowded grocery store aisle or walking in low light conditions where their vision is compromised. We can even layer on unpredictable physical challenges, like rolling a foam roller mid-path for them to step over. These complex, unpredictable elements are exactly what force the brain to execute proper, instantaneous sensory reweighting. Finally, we hit Section 4, the symptom-dose rule. So the crucial point here is managing safety while pushing boundaries. How do we manage the patient's experience while we push them through this rigorous algorithm? I really want to hammer home this golden clinical rule: dose to mild instability that resolves within minutes. We need to challenge the system to create change. So mild symptoms and a bit of a wobble are actually exactly what we want. That is the perfect dose for neuroplasticity. However, if you induce severe dizziness, nausea, or instability that lasts for hours past the session, well, you've pushed too hard. You've overwhelmed the system rather than trained it. Mild and resolving, that's your sweet spot. Let's do a quick recap of the core message from today's explainer. Ditch the generic worksheets. Use a structured, static stance-by surface grid to systematically challenge sensory input. Once they're stable, add reactive perturbations. Then translate all of that to dynamic gait with head turns, dual tasking, and varied terrain. And through the entire process, absolutely always follow the symptom dosing rule to keep your patient safe and constantly progressing. We've covered a ton of ground today, but we are not done yet. Next up in Part 4, we'll close out this explainer series by looking at advanced falls prevention strategies, how to ensure maximum real-world carryover, and we'll wrap up with the final objective outcome measurements you absolutely need to prove your clinical success. You really won't want to miss it. For additional resources, including the full literature review, the clinical cheat sheet, audio overviews, and the rest of this video series, visit AustralianDizzinessClinics.com. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a rating to support the series. Before you see your next patient today, ask yourself, are you giving them a worksheet or are you giving them a true pathway to neuroplasticity?